I have one final question. I'm running out of time. One final question to all our guests. I want to start with Mr. Sitaram Yechury. Mr. Yechury, has this press conference, live, broadcast across the nation, achieved what the Prime Minister's media managers and spin doctors would have? He was alleged to be a silent Prime Minister, not doing enough to act against corruption. He's come out and spoken. Is the purpose achieved, sir?
Unfortunately, I don't think the purpose for which ought to have been achieved has been achieved. He doesn't show that he's in command of the situation. There are compulsions that he's spoken of, and the very fact that it was done a week before the budget is being presented could also act as a dampener, because nothing major could have been announced in this. So overall, I mean, it was more like a fact that it was an exposure to certain questions in the media, but not in that sense of emerging as the commander of, let's say, the political commander of the country. But even he did clear a lot of issues. I mean, that is good for the country and for him. But I don't think the full purpose has been achieved.
Shravan, your take on this?
Well, I think it's right that he's conceded that the ethical deficit, he's more or less bowed to what the people of the country are now believing is actually taking place. But this entire question of the silent Prime Minister, I mean, it's a travesty to ask such a question, that he's actually broken the myth of a silent Prime Minister. Should Prime Ministers be silent at all? Isn't it the job of the Prime Minister to be accountable both to the political class and to the nation as a whole? That it takes him about 6 months to actually say something on an issue which has been agitating something? I mean, breaking your silence, is that a great achievement?
Dr. Singhvi, he's admitted there's an ethical and governance deficit, and yet feels as the Prime Minister of the country, he owes no moral responsibility, saying, I relish the challenges, see no point in quitting. Isn't there some level of a moral responsibility when he admits to charge as grave as an ethical and governance deficit?
2 or 3 aspects, Rahul. First of all, anybody who has seen this interview will appreciate and must appreciate the absolute forthsightedness and the sincerity, the absolute clarity and straightforwardness of the Prime Minister. I think people are tilting in windmills. They are deliberately going at form. They are trying to nitpick at irrelevant small issues only to detract, because they find nothing major to detract from. They find that the answers actually in substance are solid, straightforward. And I think it has been a great communication with the nation. Ultimately, the only object is that. There is no other spin strategy. The object is to communicate, and I don't think the Prime Minister, who speaks through his various ministers, his various ministries, has to communicate on a weekly or a monthly basis. But when he does, he comes across without any doublespeak, without a hang in the air, without attempting to indicate doublespeakedness or long pauses, and gives to the best of his ability answers. Number 2, on the JPC, it is very clear, and let me repeat the phrase, who has the interest of the nation at heart is very clear. Having completely and obdurately stuck for 2.5 or 3 months, the opposition is now, or large sections of it are now, obviously trying to further derail the whole thing by suggesting that from beginning what has been a demand for the JPC on 2G, Mr. Advani yesterday said should be a demand for JPC on 4 other issues, on others, a state issue, on Commonwealth Games. So see the real intent. The real intent is, by hook or by crook, by any excuse, don't allow Parliament to function. So you have to ask them, the people who are obstructing.
Alright, opinion is clearly very strongly divided. We leave it to our viewers to decide whether they feel that the Prime Minister has been able to convince them or not. For the moment, Mr. Sitaram Yechury, Swapan Das Gupta, Abhishek Manu Singhvi, it's been a very engaging discussion. Thank you very much for joining us. We in fact have been asking our viewers to send in their responses and whether they are convinced by what the Prime Minister has said. And the results of our SMS poll in fact show that 85% of the people who've responded to the poll seem to suggest that they're not convinced by what the Prime Minister has said. You too can participate. HT space Y if you're convinced, HT space N if you're not convinced. We'll take your responses in later bulletins as well. For the moment, that's all that we have time for. News and updates continue on the other side. Stay.